Welcome back to This is Live, the Sunday talk show, here on the Arise News channel. Now I have Yemi Adamolekun, Executive Director in Office Enough. I also have in the studio Achike Chude, Political and Social Affairs Commentator. Thank you very much for joining me. Well, we have our two guests, GT Ogunye, commenting on the P&ID case and also the affirmation of President Tinubu's victory by the Supreme Court. And we also had Dr. Nnameka Obiariri commenting on President Tinubu, saying he will clear FX backlog and he will negotiate with looters and hoarders of Forex to address the challenge of the Naira and stabilize the market and address challenges of supply. So these are 4 issues on the table already. Let me start with you, Yemi Adamolekun.
Right. Not a lot to add to Mr. Ogunye's comments on the P&ID case. And I think but what's really important, which would be interesting to see if the government decides to hold accountable those who worked against Nigeria's interest. I'm not holding my breath, but I think it would set a really good tone in terms of nationalism and a willingness to defend Nigeria for those who did work against Nigeria. And we are quite lucky. There's elements of the law into it, but that the law worked in our favor at this time in Nigeria's history is something that we should certainly be grateful for. On the president's or the Supreme Court's judgment on the presidential elections, I think for me, one of the things, I watched your clip from the morning show, did a bit of travel. And one of the things that I thought was interesting is that, and Mr. Ogunye also confirmed that, is the fact that, and I guess maybe rightly so, that the judgment was on the side of the technical areas of the law. So you kept talking about...
Substantively.
Yeah, you said serious issues of procedure and technicality. And I thought, and you mentioned technicality of the law quite a number of times. And I think that's quite significant to remind people of the fact that, yes, the law, and Nigeria has a reputation of lawyers and judges giving judgments based on technicalities. Technically, you should have done this, but you didn't do it. But we've also seen cases where the judges are more interested in justice rather than the technicality of the law and don't play to that game of what is technically right or wrong. But I think what's important, and I think it should be stated quite clearly, is the points that you made about the presentation of the plaintiffs, the counsel, and how they prepared their case. Now, I haven't read the judgment, obviously, and neither am I a lawyer. But I think 2 things for me that are significant from that judgment is, one, we are now all clear that Abuja is not a special state. So 25% must have is neither here nor there. That's number 1. Number 2, the fact that the Supreme Court has re-emphasized that, in a sense, IREV is immaterial. And I think that's very important. And this is when we're talking about technicalities versus justice. The Constitution says, and the Electoral Act, actually, the Electoral Act says INEC can determine what type of technology it uses and how it uses technology. Then INEC issues guidelines and regulations, which form, if we're talking technicality, form technically part of the legal framework for the elections. And in its regulations and guidelines states how it plans to use technology. And the Supreme Court is now saying that that is not known to law, that the IREV is not known to law, because it's not in neither the Constitution or the Electoral Act. And I think that's very unfortunate. We've started that with the Adeleke case, and it's also re-emphasized in this case. So for those planning elections that we're planning to have in 2 weeks, the IREV is quite frankly irrelevant, is what my understanding is. Again, I'm not a lawyer, so feel free to correct me, Dr. Abati. And I think that's really very critical. That in one vein, you say they have the powers in part of their independence to determine procedures and guidelines for elections. And at the same time, you're saying it's not known to law because it's neither in the Act nor in the Constitution. That as a challenge. And then 3, so on the back of that, for those going into elections in Imo, Bayelsa, and Kogi in 2 weeks, your Form ECAT is your Bible. So hold on to it very tightly, because IREV will not be helping you. And then lastly, I think I mean, you also said it in the clip that the issues of law and justice are not about emotions and how people feel. I think in the midst and in the model of people's emotions about these elections and how they felt the elections were run, parts of the process and the procedure and the legal framework of it got lost in all of that. And I would conclude by saying INEC has a lot to be held, should be held responsible for a lot of this. Number one, in the socialization that went in pre the election on what the IREV would mean and would do for the elections. So having said that, and people having believed that IREV is so critical in terms of how election results will be counted, that didn't happen. And the Supreme Court at the tribunal level, partially not understanding the technology and what that means, partially in this judgment believing that if it's not in the law, it's neither here nor there, so they didn't pay attention to the IREV and understanding what that meant. That hope that Nigerians had in the IREV providing some kind of transparency and clarity for the elections, in a sense, I think the Supreme Court has said, well, too bad, it didn't have the powers you were told it had, and we are choosing not to recognize that power. I think that says a lot, and we really need to review that as we move on in our elections, because it was something that Nigerians, those both voters and those on the election observation or environment, thought would be a game changer in providing real-time review, and also when elections would do manual collation, yes, but the guidance clearly stated that in point of discrepancy, the IREV was superior. But the Supreme Court is now saying that that's not the case. And I think that's really very, very important. And lastly, sorry, before I then go, and tied to that is the fact that people believed that if the results were manipulated, so because the IREV was not now showing results in real time, it meant the results were being manipulated. Therefore, this will be shown up in court as proof that there was something wrong with the elections. And unfortunately, that was not the case. So moving forward, the procedures are over. Elections, as regards our election process in Nigeria are over, and there's a lot to do in Nigeria. And tying that to the conversations around the economy, I mean, there's really nothing much to add, except the fact that there is nothing this administration has done beyond we will do. Two conflicting or two parallel conversations happening: increased cost of living and distress for citizens. But then nothing on the part of government that shows that they're reflective of that or they're mindful of that. And that continues to be the challenge that we have. But there are a lot of we will do's that we don't see. There's a lot to be done. And yeah.
Well, in 1654, a playwright, English playwright called George Chapman, wrote a play called Revenge for Honor, in which he described the law as an ass. Donkey, right? In the 19th century, Charles Dickens wrote Oliver Twist, in which a character, Mr. Bumble, repeated the same phrase and said, the law is an ass, which is like the law is stupid. I get many Nigerians having that kind of feeling today. But I keep making the point that lawyers, judges, their commitment is to the law. It's the only clientele that they have, not emotions, not sentiments. Do you agree? Like other people say, the law is an ass, or you agree that their lordships have done their duty according to the law?
You know, they determine what the law is. Well, some would say based on evidence that is before them. Mm-hmm. You cannot say otherwise. Whether you agree with it or with their pronouncement or whether you do not, the reality is that by virtue of the laws of the land, they are the ones that are mandated to take a final decision, whether they are right or they are wrong. But we would assume, and we have to believe for the purpose of the good ordering of society, that they are right. Otherwise, there will be chaos and instability. But you see, even they themselves might not, while they might pronounce, especially at the level of the Supreme Court, they have pronounced the final judgment. They know ultimately that there's another judgment that is more final than their judgment. And that is why when they sentence somebody to death, for instance, they say, after they have sentenced the person, they say, and may God have mercy on your soul. There's another judge that they recognize even by that statement. Then there's the court of public opinion also. Because don't forget, the thing about this election is that it happened in the presence of Nigerians. Nigerians participated. Nigerians have an idea of what happened and what did not happen in that election.
Nigerians
are biased. Nigerians are partisan, Nigerians are biased, but Nigerians are also objective. In the sense that there are people, it's just like, for instance, people, you always have the independents, you always have people in the middle. In every polity, you have, they are neither here, they are neither there, but they want to be in the middle. And sometimes people have said, you must take a position. You cannot say that you're in the middle. And that's why you see, and the election itself was so unique in so many ways. Apart from the fact that it broke the dominance of the two, dominant political parties from 1999 till date. You now had a third party. And then you now had a wave of movement towards maybe a third party. Because people were upset with what they have seen in the last 24 years of this country and the rest. And then also moved accordingly. And obviously, because we must not forget the fact that when Tahiru Jega was leaving, one of the last things he said was expressing his disappointment about the political class. That the greatest danger to Nigeria's democracy is the politicians. And they are supposed to be the guardians, if I'll put it that way, of our democratic process. But so, when you have a situation where, for instance, in an off-cycle election, we started maybe from 1999, 10,000 policemen deployed, to a particular state. Next, election cycle, for off-cycle elections, you should have a reduction from 10,000 to maybe 8,000, 7,000. That tells you something that something is happening within a democratic culture. We're embracing some of these things. But what we have seen is an increase, phenomenal increase, 15,000, 20,000, 34,000. Is the clearest lesson that we have learned nothing and forgotten nothing about our democracy, especially from the elites. And so you find a situation where even institutions of state, and that's why we have always talked about the need for strong institutions and not strong, men and women. Because, a situation where, for instance, you say INEC independent, like Fela would say, whether you call it Armed Forces Ruling Council, Revolutionary Council of Nigeria, or whatever it is, it all translates to soldier go, soldier come. It's all a matter of name. And so you have a situation, you say independent, National Electoral Commission. You have, the EFCC. You have the CBN. Now they are talking about a CBN that is truly independent and the rest. We have not solved the problem of politics in this country. And so you can, and that's that's one of the problems even I have with economists. Yes, in the context of for economics and all that, there are certain things they will come up with: microeconomic, macroeconomics, and all of these things, fiscal policies, monetary policies, and all of that. Yes, but in what environment are you having all of these policies? In a political environment that dominates the polity itself, and not the economy driving the polity. In the more successful countries of the world, it is the economy that drives the polity. Decisions, for instance, at elections are most times dependent on the nature and the character of the economy of the country. But here, it is the politics that drives it. So until we can have the right kind of politics, and for me, I have maintained that the country has not had economic problems in the country. Yes, we can see when the issue of inflation, you talk about inflation, you talk about so many of the economic woes that Nigerians are going through. These are economic issues, clearly. But what is driving it? Because when you look at the elements of power, national power, and you talk about the elements of national power, you will talk about ICT, you talk about geography, even location of countries could be critical to the success of those countries. Afghanistan, for instance, became a place that was over the years have been impregnable to some of the most advanced militaries in the world because of their geography. Britain was able to rule the waves for so many centuries, for so many years and decades, because of their closeness to the sea and all of that. Then beyond that, you have other elements of national power. But above all of this is the most critical and the most important, and that is the issue of leadership. Because once you solve the problem of leadership, you will put all the other variables that are important for determining the success of nations.
Okay, I get your point about leadership, but I will expect both of you to comment on the P&ID case. You know, people have been celebrating, jubilating, that we didn't lose about a third of the GDP of Nigeria, $11 billion that we were supposed to pay after the $6.6 billion, 7% interest rate since 2017.
Yeah, Yemi said something, about that briefly, and again she said the courts, maybe that was how she put it, came to our rescue. But I think it is significant to know that it's a foreign court that has come to our rescue. I remember the governor.
That's the place of arbitration.
Of course. I agree. But we also had, issues in Delta State when I think an ex-governor had over 100 and something 60 count charges against him, and then was found not guilty, was exonerated by the court, was arrested, taken to the United Kingdom, and they came to our rescue, and all that. So it's a very good thing that we have that, because I can tell you that I was worried in 2017 when that damage, award was the award was given against us for about $6 billion. Then we had a debt profile of around 35 billion dollars then. And so the worry was, where are we going to get this money from? That's a lot of money to pay. So I'm glad that they say, look, that there were inconsistencies, and that this is something that was obtained by fraud and all that, and will not stand. And so I guess that is a very good thing. But it's also a lesson, because I think the question you asked, Yemi, was what does she anticipate any punitive actions against people who engage in this kind of larceny? And she didn't hold her breath. She said, yes, she hopes that would happen. But we've remembered cases like the Halliburton case, in the United States, and then even in France, they also had their own case of people who came to Nigeria and got involved in the corruption process in this country. Their government got wind of it and then took them to task, and some of them were jailed. And our people continued to move about in absolute freedom in Nigeria, to tell you that the system, again, is tolerant of this kind of malfeasance, which is unfortunate. But there are lessons to be learned, and we hope that those who should learn these lessons, learn the lessons. But we should insist under normal circumstances that people who try to throw this country into this level of debt, because I see this as a deal. People were involved in this because you are going to make something out of it. That's my own feeling. But I think that if we are serious, if we need to, you cannot keep on doing this, because, somewhere it is said that when a crime goes unpunished, the heart of the people is filled with rebellion. And that is what, I think, has continued to happen in this country. Impunity arises because people who cause certain strictures within the system are not punished.
Well, Yemi, you travel frequently. I thought you were going to comment on what is happening to the Naira and the Forex regime. Maybe 2, 3, 4 months ago, when you travel, you could have more Forex. Well, now the exchange rate is very serious.
But I said it. I think I said it when I commented that all we've heard from this administration is we will. And as the analyst that was our guest said, that the arbitrage between the official rate and the black market has just continued to increase. So you float the Naira, but then you kind of fold your arms and you just watch people take advantage of it. So literally the Naira rate on the black market is, as the joke says, is somebody just wakes up in the morning and decides that this is what we're going to sell it at. And the fact that the government, we have, at the point we said, okay, maybe because we didn't have a Minister of Finance or we didn't have a CBN governor, we now have both. We have both, not only who have worked together before, who have worked with the president before, and nothing has changed. But I just wanted to say this point about the law, and I think what's really very significant that we shouldn't lose sight of is the fact that Nigerians have continued to lose confidence in the law. You talk about it being the last, what's that phrase again? The last hope of the common man, or whatever we say. But we've continued to see Nigerians lose confidence in the law, both in terms of law, and obviously from the perspective, the judiciary obviously from the perspective of lawyers and judges. The retiring Supreme Court Justice had his statement when he came. Jite said if he wanted to reform, there are things he could have done while he was sitting on the bench, and saying this post facto is really neither here nor there, because what it does is just reinforces the fact that people don't believe that the judiciary is really doing what it should. And I think it's important to say, to your point around that the judiciary is focused on the law, but there are clear cases when, and I said this before, when the Supreme Court has given judgments that are against the law. Lawan and Akpabio are clear cases. So for you to decide they were out of time and they did not participate in primaries, the law is clear. Now, this is not even a regulation and a guideline. It's in the Electoral Act. But the Supreme Court, for whatever reason, we shall not choose to speculate on what those reasons might be, decide to overlook the law. So you are the one that keeps talking about the law. That is the law. And they clearly violated the law.
No,
we now have
election cases are in a class of their own.
It's still the law.
And they made it clear that election cases, election petitions are sui generis.
I'm not talking.
There are specific
Dr. Abati, I'm not
guidelines
talking,
and timelines that you must follow,
I'm not disputing that.
which will not apply in criminal cases.
But I'm not, hold on, but I'm not disputing that. Yeah. But I'm disputing your point, the emphasis you keep putting on the law. So I'm saying that if that is the case, no, let me take that back. I'm saying we have a clear case when they have not obeyed the law. So they're not, one, infallible. Number two, they are not, the law is not their only client. End.
It is good because I didn't
by facts. I presented my facts.
I didn't give my opinion.
No, facts must be pleaded. When facts are not pleaded and proven,
and they are
inadmissible.
Them and have proven them in the fact that Akpabio is current Senate president.
I have heard since this slew of cases started, election-related cases, I've heard people say that the law is not, there's no morality in the law. I have had cause to strenuously and seriously disagree. Because the basis of the law is moral. It is about right and wrong. Okay. It is about, and so we want to do, even the concept of justice itself is about wanting to do the right thing. But you see, it's important that when we look at like some of the issues that I think even Yemi talked about that is the fact that, there are some things that some of us took for granted. Really, I mean, for some of us who have been doing one kind of advocacy or not, especially with regards to elections and all that, the Electoral Act and the rest, we didn't factor properly the human condition and the human person and the ability of the people who are going to administer this election. We didn't factor, the fact that they might act in certain ways, that might end up raising questions about the validity of the elections. So perhaps we're a little bit lax when it comes to that because we are concentrating on changing, the Electoral Act and the rest. Now we have seen that there are so many loopholes within that. But one of the things that actually concerns me, so much really, I agree, from what the justice who just retired said, and it is very serious, Musa Datijo. He said that public perception of the judiciary have become witheringly scornful and monstrously critical. That the judiciary is characterized by filthy intrigues with judges now comfortable in companies they never would have kept in the past. So you now see a situation, for instance, where certain judgments are given, and in the minds of the public, naive public who don't know anything about the law, if we're going to put it that way, there's this perception that perhaps they have done it again. And that is what the justice was talking about. And then we also look at the fact that the courts are operating in an environment where we can say, look, there's endemic corruption. The last CGN of Nigeria also, the petition that was written against him in an unprecedented manner by justices of the Supreme Court was also an indication. And so as long as you have this situation, I can tell you that there is no judgment, even though Nigerians are partisan, they've taken side, yes, but there is actually no judgment that would come out from the chambers that a lot of people are not going to look at with serious suspicion. We don't want that kind of judicial system in this country. We want to have judges sit up and take positions. I mean, they used to, some of them were bold enough even against the military. against the military with their decrees and with their edicts. Yeah, when we had people like Oputa and some of these other fine judges and who we say no, they knew that they were military people with jackboots and guns and the rest, and they said no, this is not what the law says. This is not what the constitution of this country says. And they defy them. But unfortunately, I'm not so sure that we can say so about the judges that we have today. Okay. It's also part of our story.
Very quickly, if I may make a comment on this whole argument about law and morality. In every law faculty, they teach jurisprudence, which is basically philosophy, not necessarily the law. Yes. And one of the things that will be considered in jurisprudence will be morality and ethics. From St. Aquinas to
Socrates,
Aristotle,
John Locke,
Vinny, to Jeremy Bentham, and his utilitarian concept of law and all that. But the issue is, look, what is that connection between law, substantive law, and society's moral and immoral concepts? So it's a whole, that's philosophy. Good. It is not law.
Also remember that society, I agree, but also remember that judges sit over laws that are made by the society. So society can determine even if, but like you said, let's not go into that.
The argument about jurisprudence. Yeah. But I get where you are coming from. It's the philosophy of the law. Okay, let's take another subject. The federal government is set to pay 500 million naira fines to secure the freedom of 4,000 inmates from correctional facilities across Nigeria. That's according to the Minister of Interior, Olubunmi Tunji-Ojo. Speaking on plans to decongest correctional facilities, the minister said 4,000 inmates are in prison over their inability to pay a total of over 500 million naira fines. He assured that the inmates will be released in the next 4 weeks. Well, Yemi, they want to decongest the prisons. They want to help all those people who cannot pay their fines leave the prisons. So this is about prison reform. What do you think?
I mean, just on the surface of it, don't know the detail. I think it is welcome. It's like people going into hospitals and paying bills of people who are stuck because they can't pay their fees and the hospital is keeping them. But I think more fundamentally, what I would like to hear from the minister is a more comprehensive reform of our correctional facility. One, we don't have a database of prisoners. And this has become very interesting, at least for me as a citizen, on the back of the NSAS protest. The challenge it has taken across states like Lagos and Oyo to even track the people that were arrested and are still imprisoned in Lagos. There are uncertain numbers of people that are imprisoned in Lagos, for example, because we don't have a central database. When were they arrested? People that have been charged and have not made it to court. So in addition to people who can't, I mean, from sort of my cursory look, you have those who can't pay their fines, but you also have those awaiting trial. So you're charged for something that if you had gone to prison, you'd have gone to prison for 5 years. Or let me even say 1 year. But you've been in jail for 5 years. So that, again, is also a very quick win in terms of decongesting the prison. But the joke about our correctional facilities is our prisons get a budget by the number of prisoners they have. So there's an incentive, and it's true. I mean, if you think about it in sort of basic sense, there's an incentive to keep people in jail. And there's an incentive to inflate those numbers by not having a clear database of this is how many people I have. And these are their charges, this is the dates they're in court, they're waiting, whatever the case might be. So I think for me, that's really would be more meaningful. Like prison reform, low-hanging fruits beyond just, I mean, money is good and it would at least get some people the opportunity to continue their lives out of prison. But in addition to that, I'd also say it's not just coming out of prison. For someone who spent 5 years in prison, because you couldn't pay, sake of argument, 500,000 naira. You spent 5 years in prison. Releasing that person back into society is a little bit more than just their freedom. And so what is the process within our correctional structure to rehabilitate people, and also the stigma that comes with the fact that you're an ex-prisoner, even if you were in prison wrongfully. So there are many layers to it, and I think that's the conversation we should be having.
Yeah, the prison is just what the correctional centers is just one aspect of the criminal justice system. Obviously, the criminals or something needs to be done about the entirety of the criminal justice system. Investigation, prosecution, and all that. Again, the question you ask yourself is whether the federal government has any business, for instance, running prisons across the country. It's also a debate that has been ongoing. Do you want to allow the states to also take over that responsibility? I've not seen many states make that argument. They've argued about some other things, but not this, because obviously they're going to see it as a burden. I know that there have been, different attempts, even at the federal level, and then at various states, like in Lagos State and all that, to also reform the criminal justice system. But ultimately you have everybody going to prisons in various places. I mean, of course, the state of the prisons, it's horrible. A prison is supposed to be.
There before?
I've been there to help to rescue some people.
Oh, yeah.
That's a bit of a mischievous question. and so I need to answer it correctly. I have not been there for the purpose of incarceration, but to help people who have been incarceration. So, the thing is that even before this, a lot of NGOs, organizations have been involved in one way or the other in getting people out. They've been paying fees for people to, do common entrance exams and the rest. And then for people who are owing as little as 10,000 naira, 15,000 naira. I know a lot of these organizations that have been able to do that over time. And then you also have the magistrates too, in line with the, criminal justice reform system too, going to prisons and trying and, releasing as much as they can. They have been doing that. But when you look at the number of people and the fact that as more people are being, some people are being released, a lot more are going in. I mean, a situation where over 70% of people, inmates are awaiting trial. Trial inmates. It's a terrible situation. And some of them have stayed there for as much as, a group of about 3 people or so has spent about 32 years, waiting for their cases to be heard in court. I was involved in that particular advocacy. And so that is a terrible situation. So, and ultimately at the end of the day, a lot of them, what is the investigative process even of the Nigerian police? So you find a lot of people spending 10, 15 years, inside the prison, and then coming out later, and then maybe sometimes you realize that they were not guilty in the first place. How can you ever integrate such a person into society?
And all of this is tied to fundamental human rights, as enshrined in Chapter 4 of the 1999 Constitution. Let's take very briefly, we have just a few minutes to go, one more topic. The United Nations General Assembly has adopted a resolution seeking an immediate humanitarian truce and aid access to Gaza. The non-binding test by Arab states passed to a round of applause with 121 votes in favor, while 44 abstained, and 44, including Israel and the United States, voted no. Israel criticized the resolution for failing to mention Hamas. Meanwhile, the ongoing Palestine-Israel conflict, according to data released by the health authorities, has resulted in more than 9,500 deaths. Yemi, Israel versus Hamas. Briefly.
I think the vote is interesting. One of the debates that I thought was interesting on Twitter, in line of it, was how the question was framed. That basically, I forget the nuance, but basically someone said, if you say, if you see someone on the street and they need help, would you stop to help them? And those are the people that voted yes. And then someone says, well, if someone comes into your house, shoots at you, and then rapes your wife in front of you, would you help the person? So that the way the question is, the point that we're trying to make is that if you make the Palestinians seem harmless, then obviously people will want to help. But if you frame it as them being the aggressor, then people might not be willing to help. But really, the truth of the matter is, Hamas and the war it's raging, and just Palestinian citizens who, as some of the footage we've seen, keep saying, we didn't ask for this. We didn't ask for this. Nobody said we're going to war. Sign here that you want to join us in attacking Israel. And they become the casualties of war. So as humans, and as you would say, there are plenty legal provisions that talk about how conditions in terms of war.
Before conventions,
Thank you.
Geneva Conventions of 1949,
there you go.
and the additional protocols of 1977.
There you go. I knew you would have the legal framework that we should as human beings be concerned about our fellow humans beyond because there is the geopolitics of what is happening, and then they're just human beings who are casualties in a sense of war. And for me, the resolution was basically saying, leave the why, but the people that are now the casualties of it, should we help them? And the answer should be a clear yes.
Well, briefly, Achike, Chude.
For those who say that all is fair in war, I think the various Geneva Conventions on the rule of war, humanitarian law, makes it very clear that even in worst case scenarios, when wars have to be fought, because for as long as you have humans on earth, you always have disagreements, and sometimes these disagreements lead to battle. And so, but when you go into battle, there are certain do's and don'ts. And so some of these things must be respected. And this is exactly, I think, what that resolution is saying.
There's violation of the law, the legal framework, on both sides.
On both sides, absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much, Achike Chude. Thank you very much, Yemi Adamolekun. You've been watching This Day Live, the Sunday talk show, here on Arise News. I'm Ruben Abati from our entire team here in Lagos. It's bye for now, and thank you very much for watching.